I messed up. It was our 10th anniversary, but my husband caught me with a fair partner. Sometimes you don't know the value of what you have until you lose it. I'm not proud of myself and the things I have done. If I could turn back the hands of time, I would definitely do things differently. I don't even know where to start my story from. I'm so full of guilt right now. My husband wanted to surprise me on our 10th wedding anniversary, but unfortunately he caught me cheating on him on our matrimonial bed. Before you guys judge me, I had no idea he wanted to surprise me on that fateful day. I didn't even remember it was our 10th wedding anniversary. Don't get me wrong, I regret cheating on my husband. I feel so ashamed of myself, right, just by speaking about it. But I have to gather courage and write my story so someone might learn from it. How I wish there's a magic word that can change everything, but unfortunately there isn't. My name is Caroline and I'm 31 years old. The name of my husband is Ken. He is a 40 years old businessman. Ken and I have been married for 10 years now, and our marriage is blessed with 2 wonderful children, a beautiful girl and a handsome boy. We live in Washington, D.C. Ken and I met 10 years ago. I can still vividly remember how everything happened. I was a sales rep at a big fashion store. Ken was a regular customer at the store. He frequents the store almost every week for shopping. All the ladies had their eyes on him, but his eyes were fixed on only me. He later told me he took interest in me because of how reserved I was, and I wasn't like the rest of the desperate ladies who literally threw themselves at him. All the ladies wanted Ken because of his money. I had a boyfriend then, so I turned Ken down when he asked me out on a date the first time, but he was very persistent that I had to give in to him at some point. For me, it wasn't really love at sight, but over the years I grew to love him. But it was love at first sight for Ken. He told me he fell in love with me the first day he set his on me. Ken didn't care that I wasn't in the same social status with him. Ken was willing to go to any length to show how much he loves me. Even though he was a very busy man, he was always there for me. He always provided everything I asked for. He even asked me to stop working at the fashion store when I complained to him how hectic the job was for me. He even placed me on a monthly salary, so I didn't even need to work anymore. Money was no longer my problem. All this and more made me fall in love with Ken. So I summoned up courage and broke up with my boyfriend, Sky. Sky was my childhood sweetheart. It was hard for me to break up with him. Unlike Ken, Sky is a very handsome man. I love Sky so much, but over the few months I met Ken, I had grown to love him too. Sky told me he would never forgive me for leaving him and breaking his heart. He always believed I broke up with him because he was poor and wasn't as rich as Ken, but that's not true. Ken and I got married 6 months after we met. He didn't know I had a boyfriend before, though. Our wedding was the talk of the town. I had my dream wedding. It was too beautiful to be true, just like a fairy tale. Ken's parents sponsored the wedding, even though they never wanted him to get married to me. They always called me low class and believed I wasn't good for their son, but after seeing how adamant Ken was, and how he was ready to marry me without their approval, they didn't have any other option. They had to come around somehow, so sponsoring the wedding was their own way of making amends with their only son. Everyone believed I was a gold digger and that I was marrying Ken because of his money, but they were all wrong. I fell in love with Ken because I saw how he always put me first. Getting married to Ken was the best decision I have ever made in my entire life. Ken was not just a good husband, he was a great dad to our kids. He was always there for me and the kids. Ken was very busy, but he always created time for me and the kids. Ken is a very intentional man. 3 years into our marriage, after I birthed our first child, Ken opened a big jewelry store for me. It was a huge surprise for me because I had no idea he was even planning anything of sorts. Although I was expecting a push gift from him, but I didn't imagine it would be that big. And when I birthed our second child, he bought me a big mansion. I was perplexed. Money wasn't my problem. The only thing I lacked was his undivided attention because he was a very busy man. Just thinking about everything now, I regret how badly I have treated Ken. He is a good man and doesn't deserve a woman like me. He doesn't even deserve everything I put him through. Ken is just too good to be through. Initially, I thought he was just pretending to be a good man and thought he would change after the wedding, but I was wrong. If for anything, he continued to shower me with more love, but I ruined everything by cheating on him. Everything started 8 months ago. Sky somehow came back into my life. I regret going grocery shopping on that fateful day. I went grocery shopping, picked some things, and headed to the cashier to check my items in. While I was looking for my card to pay for the things I picked, someone from the back line offered to pay instead. Immediately, my heart fluttered because the voice sounded familiar. I turned back immediately to confirm who sounded like my ex-boyfriend Sky, and to my greatest surprise, He was the one. I couldn't believe my eyes. I haven't seen Sky ever since I broke up with him 10 years ago. I blocked his contact and blocked him on all social media, so I was surprised to see him after so many years. We exchanged pleasantries and he insisted on paying for my groceries. After a lot of back and forth, I gave in and allowed him to pay. He helped me carry my bags to the car and gave me his contact information. He made me promise I would give him a call. Seeing Sky awoke old feelings. He looked more handsome and matured. Meeting him brought back old memories. He wasn't the Sky I used to know 10 years ago. He was more handsome, richer, and with a fine body. Sky didn't have six-packs 10 years ago. One thing is certain, Sky has changed, and it's in a good way. I fell in love with him all over again. Sky is physically attractive. He was my first love. I've always loved him. I guess it's true what they say that you can never forget your first love. On getting home that day, I couldn't forget about Sky. I kept thinking about him and how handsome he looked. I started imagining how my life would have been if we were still together. I decided to give Sky a call just to say thank you. I called him and he sounded surprised. He told me he didn't know if I was actually going to call him, so I told him I just wanted to thank him for paying for my groceries and helping me out. He asked if we could meet the following day, but I told him it wasn't necessary. He told me it wasn't a date, it was just for us to catch up at our favorite coffee shop. I later gave in after a lot of convincing from Sky. I mean, it wasn't a real date. What could go wrong, really? But I wish I never accepted to meet him. That was the beginning of my nightmare. After dropping the call, I decided to go unblock Sky on Facebook and Instagram because he asked me to please unblock him. Going through his Facebook profile, I was surprised to see how rich Sky has become. He always traveled around the world for vacation. Seeing his cute pictures made me fall in love with him all over again. The following day, I woke up very early to prepare my kids for school. I was very excited that day because I was meeting Sky, my first love. Luck was on my side because Ken wasn't around. He was on a business trip, so it was just I and the kids. That has been my problem ever since I married Ken. He was always traveling from one business trip to another. But he always made sure we communicated and that we never lacked anything. But he wasn't always around. Sometimes I get lonely because Ken is not around. And even when he is around, there's not much difference. Ken is a very reserved man. He doesn't talk much, but I can bet with everything that he is a good man. Sometimes I get bored with him. So for the first time, I was happy he wasn't around. So I started getting ready for my meeting, or should I say mini date with Sky. I had butterflies in my stomach when I walked into the coffee shop and saw Sky seated waiting for me. I can't even describe how I felt that day. He stood up to welcome me and help me have my seat. We started talking and catching up on old times. I was shocked to see that Sky still had the pictures of us together all over his phone. I was even more shocked when he told me he still loves me and would want us to start afresh. He asked me to leave my husband and come back to him because he had made money and could take care of me comfortably. But I told him that wasn't possible because I already have kids with Ken and it's not that easy. He started pleading that I should please come back to him. Deep down, I wanted to, but I can't bring myself to leave Ken. I know I would lose everything if I tried that, and I don't want to be separated from my kids. I checked my watch and it was almost 1 p.m., so I picked my purse and dashed out, leaving only Sky at the table, because I suddenly remembered Ken was supposed to come back from his business trip that day. I got home hoping to see Ken, but he wasn't at home, so I picked up my phone and called him. He told me something unexpected came up and he wouldn't be able to make it until the following week. Honestly, I wasn't disappointed. I was used to hearing such things from him. Immediately, I started regretting leaving Sky all by himself at the coffee shop, so I called him and asked if he was still at the coffee shop, but he told me he already left and was at home. He asked me to come pay him a visit in his house. I was reluctant at first, but I was tired of being alone. So I asked him to send his address that I was coming. I mean, what could go wrong? It's just a harmless visit, right? So I thought. When I arrived at Sky's house, at first I thought he gave me a wrong address or I missed his house. His house was very big and beautiful. I couldn't believe my eyes. I thought it was a celebrity house or something, but he told me the house was his. I got inside and I was even more in disbelief. The interior, everything was just beautiful. Sky offered me a glass of wine and started cooking for me. It was very romantic. He served me the food and we ate together. After that, we played some games as we usually do back then in the days when we were together. Somehow one thing led to another and I slept with Sky. It was after everything that my eyes cleared. I couldn't believe I just broke my marriage vows with my ex-boyfriend. Guilt was all over me. I regretted everything instantly. I felt bad for Ken. He doesn't deserve this from me. Not after everything he has done for me. I hated myself for the rest of that day. I couldn't concentrate on anything. I was so full of guilt. I immediately left Sky's house before he would wake up. I made up my mind to block him again and just erased him from my mind completely, but I couldn't bring myself to do that. Before I got home, I got a text message from Sky professing how much he loves me and couldn't leave without me. He begged me to give us a chance and just think about everything. After giving everything a second thought, I decided to continue my affair with Sky. Don't judge me, guys. I was lonely. I couldn't bring myself to stop no matter how hard I tried. Sky became like a bad addiction. I couldn't stay away from him no matter how hard I tried. We continued seeing each until Ken arrived from his business trip, so I blocked Sky for the period Ken was around. I will not lie. I kept wishing for Ken to travel on another business trip so I could resume my illicit affair, but unfortunately for me, Ken stayed around for 3 months before traveling again. Those 3 months were like the longest unhappy period of my life. I wasn't happy I could no longer see Sky, the love of my life. Ken tried to cheer me up. He tried his best to cheer me up, not knowing what was wrong with me. He thought I was mad at him for not returning from his trip earlier as promised. He tried to make amends, which was why he stayed behind for 3 months. He said he wanted to spend more time with me and the kids. The more he tried to please me, the more I became angry. I couldn't even wait for the 3 months to be over so he could go back. But after seeing how he was trying his best to cheer me up, I felt bad. One day I sat down to evaluate everything that had happened and started crying. I felt sorry for my husband for the very first time. He doesn't deserve this. I vowed to forget about Sky and start loving my husband all over again. I decided to change and be the loving, happy person everyone knew me to be, because my attitude was not only affecting Ken, it was also affecting the kids. Every day I kept blaming myself for almost running my marriage. Everything was going smoothly. Peace was already restored in my home. Until one fateful day, Ken and I went out on a date like we always do whenever he's around. Can you guys imagine who we ran into at the restaurant? Sky, yes, you guys guessed right. We ran into Sky. I almost developed a heart attack that day. While Ken and I were seated and having our dinner, Sky walked in and introduced himself to Ken as my special boyfriend friend. I couldn't believe my eyes. I was too stunned to speak. Apparently he was tracking me. But luckily for me, he quickly changed everything and said he was joking, and that he was an old acquaintance of mine. Ken invited him to join our table so we could eat together. I thought Sky would decline, but surprisingly, he accepted. The dinner was awkward. I was tense all through because I couldn't figure out what Sky was doing in the restaurant in the first place, and why Ken asked him to join us. At that point, I was scared. It felt like Sky was on a mission to reveal our little secret to my husband. Ken noticed how tense I was and asked if I was okay. I lied to him that I was having cramps, so he asked we leave immediately. He paid the bills and apologized to Sky about us leaving abruptly. While on our way home, I was still in shock. I couldn't believe I almost got caught. Ken kept looking at me all through our drive home. For someone as smart as Ken, I knew he was already suspecting something, so I had to act fast and clear up any loopholes. I deleted all my chats, call logs, and everything that connects me to Sky from my phone. I couldn't risk getting caught. I know Ken too well. I know he is a quiet man, but he can go out of character when someone crosses the line with him. I knew there was no way he would forgive me if he ever finds out I cheated on him with my ex-boyfriend. Hell would break loose that day. Immediately after we got home that day, I ran into the bathroom, turned the shower on. I unblocked Sky and called him immediately. I warned him never to try such stupid taunts with me ever again. Immediately, I delivered my message and I blocked him again. I didn't even give him the chance to explain anything. One day, I caught Ken snooping on my phone. I knew what he was looking for, but unfortunately for him, I had already deleted all the chats and there was nothing on my phone. I pretended not to see him and just continued with what I was doing. He tried to bring up the conversation several times, but I always got upset. One day he asked me why I acted awkward around Sky, but I got defensive. I turned everything around and asked him what he meant by that. I knew he wouldn't back down anytime soon if I didn't act fast, so I lied to him that Sky was my best friend's boyfriend and that I got to know Sky through my best. I told him I fell out with Sky when he broke my best friend's heart, and that's why I was awkward around him. Deep down, I knew Ken didn't believe everything I was saying, but had to let go of the topic for peace to reign. Everything was going so well until Ken traveled on another business trip. Somehow I unblocked Sky and we continued our affair. Don't judge me, guys. I tried, but I couldn't control myself. I always feel alone whenever Ken is not around. Our affair continued to blossom on till one fateful day, everything changed for the worst. I lost everything on that fateful day. I wish I never cheated on my husband in the first place. Update. Hi guys, I'm back again. My whole life changed on that fateful day. I got caught, guys. Yes, Ken caught me and Sky on our matrimonial bed red-handed. That fateful day was our anniversary. I didn't even know it was our 10th wedding anniversary. Honestly, I didn't remember. Ken is usually the one that remembers every time. On that day, I asked the nanny to take my kids to Ken's parents' place for a few days since they were on holiday. So with the kids gone and Ken not around, I invited Sky over to my house for the very first time. I regret making that move. What was I thinking in the first place? But unfortunately for me, luck was not on my side on that fateful day. While Sky and I were having fun on my matrimonial bed, Ken arrived. We were so busy having fun that we didn't even know when he walked in. He opened the door and stood with flowers watching everything. It was when his phone beeped that I noticed his presence in the room. Immediately, I jumped up from the bed and quickly covered myself with a duvet. I felt ashamed of myself that day. Sky, on the other hand, picked his clothes, wore it, and walked without saying a word. Ken didn't say a word to him either. He just stood there watching everything. Maybe he was too stunned to speak. I fell on my knees immediately and started begging Ken to forgive me. I told him I didn't know what came over me, that he should please forgive me. I promised him never to ever cheat on him again. All my pleas went on deaf ears. I got the shock of my life when Ken gave me 4 dirty slaps, 2 on one chick and 2 on the other. Everything happened so fast I couldn't believe what was happening. My husband, who could not even hurt a fly, just slapped me for the very first time ever since we got married 10 years ago. I was in denial for the first 5 seconds. I couldn't believe it. But unfortunately for me, that was just the beginning of Ken's maltreatment. Can you guys imagine he went as far as trashing the flowers he bought for me? It was like I activated another side of him. He started throwing my things out and asked me to get out of his house. I was shocked. I begged him, but he refused to listen. He grabbed me and threw me out. On getting out, I saw a brand new car decorated outside. I honestly didn't understand why Ken arrived earlier than scheduled. We spoke that morning and he didn't mention anything about coming back. I was even shocked to see him with flowers. As if that wasn't enough, I saw a brand new car outside. I was puzzled. I didn't understand what was happening. It was when Ken started talking that I realized it was our anniversary. He told me he wanted to surprise. That was why he took the available flight to surprise us on our anniversary with the car. The things he said broke me. He told me he thought I was different, and after all these years together, he never imagined I would cheat on him like this, and on our matrimonial bed. He told me the marriage was over, and that I should be expecting divorce papers from him the following day. He told me outrightly that for the first time he regrets getting married to me. He even told me he regrets not listening to his parents and everyone that advised him against marrying me. All the words he was saying broke me into pieces. I was miserable. I told him I wasn't going to divorce him no matter what. He told me he would make me sign the divorce papers and that he is going to ruin my life. He said when he is finished with him, I would go back to the slum where I came from. He said everyone was right about me being a gold digger, that I only married because of his money and not because I loved him. I couldn't believe my ears. Worst of all, I couldn't believe such words were coming out from Ken's mouth. I never saw this side of him all through the 10 years we were married. He chased me out that day. He didn't even care that it was raining. He didn't even allow me to carry any of the cars. I became stranded because it was raining heavily. I managed to get a taxi and went to lodge in a hotel, hoping Ken and I would sort out our differences the following day. However, things didn't go the way I anticipated. I got a call from Ken 2 days later. I was excited when he asked me to come over. I thought he had finally come back to his senses and wanted us to reconcile, but that wasn't the case. I arrived at our home with full hope, but that hope was dashed when I saw our family lawyer seated with Ken. Our lawyer handed over the divorce papers to me and asked me to sign. Of course I refused. I told Ken nothing would ever make me sign the divorce papers, but I was humbled when he showed me the video of me and Sky on our matrimonial bed. Apparently, he videoed us while he was standing there watching everything. He must have stood there for long to even tape us. I felt ashamed. I couldn't believe that Ken was capable of such an act. I was disappointed. What's even more embarrassing was that he showed the video to our family lawyer. That day, I wished for the ground to open and swallow me up. I couldn't even raise my head. I bowed my head in shame all through the meeting. I didn't have any options. I had to sign the divorce papers because Ken threatened to show my parents and all our acquaintances if I refused to sign the divorce papers. Soon the divorce proceedings started, and that was one of the most tense periods of my life. The proceedings were full of uncertainties. Ken promised me he was going to take the children and everything from me, so I was scared of losing my kids. I didn't know what to expect. The whole situation was mentally exhausting. Unfortunately for me, I lost custody of my kids. Somehow Ken was able to manipulate his way through the help of the lawyers he hired, and they proved in court that I was an incompetent mother. They even used one of my vulnerable moments against me. They said I didn't love my kids enough that I even went as far as taking them to their grandparents' house so I could have quality time with my lover. I was shocked to hear that because it was Ken and I that agreed on sending the kids to his parents for vacation. I mean, the kids wanted to visit their grandparents. I didn't make the decision alone. It was a joint decision, but I didn't have any evidence to back it up. Ken got full custody of our kids. I almost died when the judge gave the verdict. I wasn't expecting Ken's scheming to work out. I was disappointed at Ken for lying his way through. I was even more disappointed at the system for failing me and my kids. Ken is a good father. No doubt he would really take care of the kids. But who can take care of the kids like their mother? Absolutely nobody. I was sad because my kids were my everything and I couldn't imagine my life without them. Even though I was allowed to visit, I wasn't happy because nothing would beat having them with me and making Ken pay for child support. As if that wasn't enough, he took everything from me as promised. You guys remembered I said he opened a jewelry store for me, right? Well, he sold it immediately after the divorce. Everything he ever bought for me was in the name of our kids. I couldn't even believe Ken could be that devilish. I had no idea he had the intention of selling the store. I was shocked when I arrived at the store and found out my store was locked. Worst of all was that I couldn't open the door. It was then I was told that ownership had changed and the new owner had changed the locks. I almost fainted, guys. It took all the strength to hold myself from falling. Can you imagine going to your store one day and discovering you're no longer the owner of the store? How would you feel? Well, I decided to act fast because I knew what his next move would be. I took an Uber straight to the house that Ken bought for me when I gave birth to our son 4 years ago. The house was like our mini vacation home. We always go there to chill and relax because it was far from the town. It was in a serene environment with little or no noise. So I got there hoping Ken hadn't made any move yet, but I was wrong. I guess I was late because Ken had already sold the property by the time I arrived. The house was under full construction by the new owners. At this point, I sat on the floor and started crying. Nothing mattered to me anymore because I had lost everything. My husband, kids, store, and home were all gone. I felt all alone. How do I start all over after 10 years? Worst of all was that I didn't even have any money. I used all my savings to pay the lawyers, hoping that I would get custody of my kids. I was broke and alone. Ken made sure I didn't get alimony. It wasn't really his fault, though. I was the one that suggested we sign a prenup before the wedding. I wanted to shut everyone up. Everyone said I was marrying him for his money, so I thought the best way to shut them up was by signing a prenup. Honestly, I regret everything now. If not for prenup, I would have gotten half of everything Ken owned and I wouldn't be broke and homeless right now. At that point, I was full of regret and depressed. I didn't know how to live my life without my kids. My kids didn't even want to see me. Only God knows the lies Ken must have fed them about me. I knew they were too young to understand what was going on. Maybe one day when they grow up, they would understand everything and how I fought to get them to be with me. I couldn't even live properly. I was always looking lost and tattered. I was tired, but I had to hang on for the sake of my kids. With all hope being lost, I decided to start all over again. I decided to pay Sky a visit because I have been calling him, and for some reason he hasn't been responding to my calls. I decided to go to his house since I've been there numerous times. I got there and got the biggest shock of my life. Can you guys guess what happened? I got another shock that day. I got to house Sky has been claiming to be his only to discover he doesn't own the house. Apparently the house was leased to him for a short period of time. I later found out that the latest cars he was driving were all borrowed. I couldn't understand why he did all that. I thought they were mixed up somewhere, so I kept ringing him till he finally answered my calls. I asked if we could meet up at our favorite coffee shop and discuss, but he said he didn't have time and that he was very busy with work. I was surprised because he once told me he owned a factory and that he had people working for him, so I was taken aback when he told me he was busy with work. He told me clearly on the phone that he was done with me and I should move on. He reminded me of what he told me on the night I broke up with him, how he vowed he was going to take revenge on me for breaking his heart 10 years ago. He told me he had achieved everything he had been planning for the past 10 years. He told me he vowed the very day I broke up with him that he would make sure I get divorced. And even though it took 10 years for that to happen, he was finally happy I got the taste of my own medicine. I couldn't believe my heart, guys. I had to end the call because I couldn't take everything he was saying anymore. It was later I realized that Sky was nothing like he posed to be. Everything was fake, from the house to the factory to the car he drove. Did I mention to you guys that I invested some money in the so-called factory? He didn't only lie to me, he scammed me. I felt like a fool, guys. For the first time, I felt sorry for myself. I couldn't believe I fell into Sky's trap. I thought he forgave me for breaking his heart. I didn't know he was still holding grudges against me. If I had known he was coming back to get revenge, I wouldn't have allowed myself to fall for him all over again. If there's one thing I'm certain of, it's the fact that I have always loved Sky, whether rich or not. Could he do this to me? I never knew he was this heartless. I didn't know he had turned to a crook. He told me he knew the only way he would get my attention was if he appeared rich and polished. Indirectly, he called me a gold digger. I can't believe I lost everything because I couldn't control myself. I can confidently say that the lust wasn't worth it at all. I can't believe it took me losing everything to realize that. With everything gone, I decided to start my life in a new city. So I moved to Chicago to stay with my sister. Luckily for me, I got a job as a sales rep in a fashion store. Even though the pay wasn't much, I was grateful. It took me a while to get adjusted to everything. It was like I was starting all over again. I regret my actions, and I wish I never cheated on my husband. No day passes by without me regretting everything I did. I always cry myself to sleep every night. I missed my kids. I missed my husband. I missed what my life used to be before I cheated on Ken. Ken doesn't deserve everything that I put him through. I genuinely loved Ken. Maybe not the way I loved Sky, but no one can deny my dedication to my husband. If I could go back again, I would do things differently, but I guess it's too late for that now. The more I tried to reach my kids, the more frustrated I got. Ken took our kids to go stay with his parents since he was always busy. His parents never allowed me into their home. They even instructed the kids' teachers not to allow me to have access to them when I came to visit them in their school. Worst of all was that my kids didn't want to see me. Ken's parents were very happy about our divorce, and that didn't even hide that fact. They were happy I was finally out of their son's life. They never really accepted me in the first place. That's my story, guys. That's how I lost everything due to my lust. I'm now living in regret every day. I don't think I can really move on. I spent 10 years of my life nurturing my family, and all of a sudden, that family now despised me. I don't blame anyone for my woes. I take full accountability for my actions. I'm still trying to get used to what my life is now. I still hope to finally get reunited with my kids someday. I hope they forgive me when they grow up and understand I was just a victim of my circumstances. I hope Ken will forgive me someday too. I hope I also forgive myself someday too. That is it, guys. I hope everyone, especially ladies, learned something from my story. Never cheat on a good man, ladies. I'm talking from experience, it's not worth it. The aftermath of everything is not worth it. And most importantly, the grass isn't always greener on the other side. Lowell.
I cheated on my husband, and he spared no mercy in ruining my life. When I say he had spared no expense in ruining me, I mean it to the truth. My husband didn't even think twice about how this would tell on him or report on our family situation. It was like I had ceased to exist to him once he found out about my cheating mistake. I became nothing to him, and he proceeded to treat me like what I was. For someone that had been married to him for over 7 years, he had sure treated me like a stranger. This was something that could have been solved with therapy and the likes. We had been in love once upon a time and had been married. Don't you think with this, he should have at least tried to find out what had propelled me to have an affair outside our marriage? At least he owed that to me. I know you all will be sold on decorum on this platform, talk about I owed it to him not to cheat and whatnot, but I'm on here to vent about my husband, or rather my ex-husband. He had wiped off my entire savings and taken the house he had gifted me on the day we had gotten married. The darn man hadn't stopped there. He had stripped me of all rights to have access to my son. Who cuts off all access of a mother to her son? My ex-husband, that's who. I had cheated, so what? We should have tried to fix it. I was ready to. Who wakes up and decides to just cheat on their spouse? No one. There had to be a changing factor. And in my case, there had been. There had been a lot. I didn't just wake up one morning and decide to cheat on my husband of 7 years. There had been temptation, and from there several cobwebs, which I would get into definitely. So you all would get to understand it hadn't been totally my fault that I had an affair outside my marriage. Not that I'm seeking anyone's validation on this platform. My life has already been ruined. Ruined terribly, for that matter. You know, I keep on going to sleep and waking up and thinking this would all be a dream. That somehow I had vexed the god of nightmares and not my husband, and he had kept me in this endless loop of nightmares. I had nothing to my name because I had cheated. That was a terrible wake-up call, in my opinion. Retelling this experience just seemed to have a worse effect, by the way. An effect that is now my life because I had fallen for temptation. An effect I was now living because my husband decided to throw me and our darn long marriage to the wind. But in truth, it had all been my fault, no matter how hard I tried to delude myself. I had made the mistakes, more of, and I couldn't fault him for being done with me. I could have told him from the beginning and avoided this whole nightmare. I was a total blob and everything still felt surreal. Well, I'm beginning to get carried away with writing down my thoughts on the matter, without telling y'all how everything had come to play, and how my husband ruined my life. Like I said, the premier cause of the problem had been temptations, which led to a whole lot of cobwebs. These temptations came on as a result of problems my marriage had immediately when we marked our 7th wedding anniversary. Well, that most definitely had been a night to remember. It was the night my husband's ex-wife, first love, decided to waltz back into our lives. Like, you wouldn't believe the power of this woman. She just strolled in, and my husband began panting after her like a thirsty puppy. It was demeaning and downright downgrading, for crying out loud. 7 years, I had been married to this man for 7 years, and one look at his ex-wife, I began to feel small and had my doubts. Then, the downslide of problems began. You see, when I explained to y'all on here that it hadn't truly been my fault, I wasn't lying. After my husband's ex-wife showed, and yes, I knew he had been married before, and no, I didn't know what had caused them to separate. My husband never really talked about his ex-wife or his previous marriage, and he had been taking care of me, so of course I wasn't going to ask. Things went from good to terrible since she showed her face at the party. My husband began staying at the house less, always claiming one work trip or the other lol. There was no way he wasn't distancing himself from me. I thought to myself he had to be cheating on me with her. Wasn't it obvious? But I couldn't do anything about it because, unlike the independent women of today, I had been a housewife who had popped out a son and hosted parties for my husband and his friends. No, I wasn't living in a fairy tale, and I know this will sound too good to be true, but it was my life. My parties became her parties. She took ultimate control of the house. And do you guys want to know what my husband did when I confronted him about his little mistress? Nothing. My husband did absolutely nothing. Heck, if I hadn't spoken up, she would have started living with us. He then began arguing with me over every single thing. Obviously, we argued on occasion. There was no married couple that didn't. But ever since the little witch showed up, it was like I was in an invisible competition with her, and hence the arguing with my husband. What would he prefer to have for dinner? Argue. Was he going on a trip by the weekend? Argue. It became a strain to talk to him, so one day I exploded up on him. I told him exactly what I thought of him and his little witch, and how I knew he was probably cheating on me with her. Because what other reason could she have been back into our lives for? Redditors, you needed to have seen the way my husband combusted on me. It was like I had set off the fireworks and the comparisons began. At the end of the fight, my husband told me if I wasn't satisfied with the way he was treating me with all the money and the houses and the luxury gifts, I shouldn't let the door hit me on the way out. My husband of 7 years, someone I had fallen in love with against all advice, had said that to me. I had literally gone against all warnings because of love and married him. And since I had no one he thought he could say to me. Let me give you all a little introduction on how my husband and I met. My name is Laurel, and I'm 33 years old. My husband's name is Mark, and he's 40 years old. My husband, or should I say my ex-husband? Well, I'll call him my husband till I get to the part of our divorce. My husband owned a law firm, a successful one at that, And I had met him when I had been posted there for my internship. No, I didn't study law. I had studied international relations, but my mother had wanted me to study law, so she dumped me in a law firm as punishment. You know how mothers can be. I wasn't even where the real stuff happened. I had been stuck with the solicitors back then, but I remember I met my husband when he had thrown a workers' retreat. I had badmouthed him in front of everyone, not knowing he was the owner of the law firm, and as a way to make it up to him, I became his coffee fetcher. Cliché, right? Same thing my friends had said. We had started dating a year later after my internship had ended. Luckily, I wasn't employed in the company once I was done with college, unless it would have been an office scandal. As it then, I hadn't known my husband had been married before. I got to find out with the whole of my family when he took us out for dinner and we bumped into her in a restaurant. I mean, how small could the whole of Connecticut be that we had to have ran into her there? The tension at the restaurant that evening had been so thick that even a chainsaw couldn't cut it. Apparently, as I had come to learn, they had only been married for a year and had split for reasons my husband hadn't deemed fit to tell me about. The reasons had to have been something serious because there had been a lot of side eyes and unbridled words. Once my folks had found out that he had been married before, they were strictly against the marriage. In their words, if he couldn't take care of his former wife, then he couldn't take care of me, and I was better off finding someone closer to my age. And I hadn't taken their word of warning. My parents had me cut off because I went ahead with the relationship. After a year of dating, my husband proposed, and true to their words, my parents hadn't shown up for my wedding. I could still remember the shock of not seeing them at my wedding. I had sent them invitations and had kept my fingers crossed for a miracle. But I walked down the aisle by myself with only my friends from college to clap for me. I had done all that because I had loved him. I had gone against my parents' wishes to marry this man, and after 7 years here, he was calmly telling me I could use the door if I didn't like that his ex-wife was back in his life. Can you imagine the dimwit? Why wouldn't I have cheated back? Well, I didn't leave, of course. I didn't leave because he was right. He provided for me the money, the luxury, and the gifts. I couldn't leave him, and I couldn't have left my son either, so I had stayed put. I was frustrated and desperately needed someone to talk to. So when that person came by, I took the opportunity, not knowing I was setting up a landslide for myself. My husband's partner in his law firm, Gary. At first, it was just a simple case of him asking how I was doing and if there was anything he could do to assist me. He had been so kind, so I found myself drifting more and more to him as my husband drifted away from me. My husband could be gone for more than 2 weeks on a business trip. I had wondered what kind of case could make a lawyer be gone for almost a month. I mean, he always had his cases at home base. But ever since the witch had magically appeared, my husband disappeared on various occasions. Funny occasions. And as a woman, I had needs. I needed someone to talk to. My son was barely 4 and still speaking in toddler talk. Like I had said, I hardly had any friends. My husband had been all I had. And a girl had needs, which was then coupled with the loneliness of hardly seeing my husband. The few occasions he came back, it was like I had become invisible. He preferred sleeping in one of the guest rooms rather than to be near my space. He was out like the speed of lightning before daylight cracks, and only came back when it was past midnight. The signs had just been too numerous for me not to jump into conclusions, but instead of calling him out again and have him throw me out for good this time, I turned to his friend, who seemed to be always there to listen. I turned to his friend the first time out of curiosity because I wanted to know what my husband's ex-wife had over my husband. I wanted to know the spell the witch had over my husband. So I had gone and asked my husband's best friend and partner. This was when I found out that my husband's ex-wife was also a partner in their law firm. So it was the 3 of them that ran the firm. No wonder she had such control over him. He needed her. But where had she been for the past 7 years? Why the heck did she think she could waltz in and try to test my marriage? And that foolish man I had married didn't want to do anything about it. This was where my husband's friend stepped in, and I'm sure you all can guess the rest. It started with simple trips to his house to get advice on what I should do about my husband and why I was suddenly invisible to him. Then it progressed to me talking about everything and anything with him and cooking for him. From there, that's how I landed in between the sheets with him. Yep, that's how I started sleeping with my husband's best friend and partner. Like I said earlier, I can't be fully blamed for it. I wasn't getting any attention from my husband's end, and I found where to get the attention. And my willpower crumpled like a crushed flower. Right under my nose, the thing with my husband's best friend and partner turned into an affair, and I couldn't stop. I didn't want to, quite frankly. While my husband was busy going on trips with his ex-wife or whomever, I was warming his best friend's bed with my son in daycare. Life was perfect for me. For a while, I thought I had everything panned out. My husband would never find out, and I could end this thing with his best friend when I wanted to. I was wrong on both counts. Totally wrong. My husband found out. I wondered how it had been like when he found out. His best friend had been the one to break the news to him when I couldn't succumb to his blackmail. Yes, my husband's best friend blackmailed me. I told you all it would only get worse from the moment I decided to cheat on my husband. This was how my perfect life with my affair took a turn. A month after hiding and enjoying an affair with my husband's best friend behind his back, my husband came back and started liking my company again. He even sought me out on all occasions, and the problem with his ex-wife wasn't a problem anymore. It was as if there was a transformation on the last trip he had traveled for, and I began feeling guilty. I had my family back again. I couldn't continue having an affair outside my marriage. It wouldn't bode well for me. So I decided to end the affair. In my head, I had thought it was going to be as simple as just saying it. It had been a phase, and I needed to end it. It was meant to be as simple as that. I had never been more wrong in my life. The man I had once found comfort in turned out to be a nightmare. Literally, you all. He had recorded pictures of our affair that was supposed to be hidden behind closed doors. And when I had gone to end the affair, he had thrown said pictures in my face and told me he was ready to lose the friendship with my husband, but in his own words, was I ready to lose my marriage with my husband? The car that was my life now started its journey downward on the slope of disasters. Yes, this was how my husband's best friend began blackmailing me. It started with little things like a copy of deeds, which I had no idea what he needed to use that for. I mean, I could sacrifice a couple of papers over me losing my marriage. Even though I wasn't in it for love anymore, I wouldn't even have nowhere to start to cater for myself and my child if my husband kicked me out. I didn't know how soon my fear would come to pass. From a couple of papers to keys to some drawers, the tasks to buy my husband's best friend's silence over our affair became harder by the day. The evil man wanted the firm for himself. That's what I had found out, and I couldn't keep giving him easy access to all the hard work and sweat my husband had put in to raise his company. That's when my husband's best friend became my nightmare. The threats tripled from just telling my husband about our affair, but forwarding it to their clients to diminish my husband's reputation to making threats on my son. I had to give him what he wanted. The fear of losing my marriage had conquered all the fear of my husband losing the ownership rights of his firm. Once again, I had never been so wrong and foolish in my life. I made another foolish mistake. I handed him another important document. How had I known I had made a foolish mistake? It came to slap me back in the face when my husband came back from work one day and threw papers of my affair right in my face. Like, how had I been so foolish to not see that coming? I had trusted the devil. I had trusted him to hide a lie when he was the father of lies. The time after my husband threw the pictures in my face had been a blur because he hadn't confronted me yet. He had just left me in the house and hadn't come home not even once. I hadn't known what had been happening in his head or what he was planning to do to me. I just had this dreadful feeling in my head that I was definitely done for. So I decided to start planning how I would sell most of the things he had gotten for me. My eyes had been on the condo he had gotten for me when I had given birth to my son. I could sell that and use the money to move to another city and start a new life for me and my son. I didn't know my husband's plans were going to disrupt mine totally. The fruition of my husband's plans began when he stumbled angrily into the house one evening and flung divorce papers in my face and carried my son out of the house. You remember that downward slope I had said my car, which was my life, was on? Yeah, at this point it had crashed and was tumbling in a non-stop motion. The thing I had feared the most was laughing me in the face while dancing the mamba around me. I deserved it, you all don't need to tell me. But I still had a plan. That's what I had thought. When I went to sell the house, my husband had gotten me to be able to run away once I signed the papers. I was told the house wasn't under my name. I had shown the realtor the deeds in my name, and I was told that wasn't the correct documents to the house. That the document in my hand only showed I had purchased a space in a storage unit. You can't even begin to imagine how stupid I had felt at that moment. I had been played by my husband. Like, why would he lie to me about a house if he hadn't bought me one? It had all been in the plan to ruin my life. I hadn't known then. In my head, it was just a cruel taste of fate. After the property fiasco, I had to pawn off my rings and bracelets my husband had gotten me as a show of love. I put that in quotes because after giving me a fake property for giving birth to his son, I don't think my husband understood the meaning of love. Well, I was in the middle of looking for jewelry to sell when I remembered that he had opened up a bank account for me that he had said he would be for me. I had that as my last resort because I hadn't been saving much in our marriage. He provided everything I wanted, so I hadn't seen the need to save. I regret that now. Well, I shouldn't have put much hope in the account because just like the fake property, the account was empty. Can you imagine the gall of this man? After staying with him for 7 years, he was treating me like this because I had a little affair. It wasn't even as if he was innocent in retrospect. So I went to confront him because I wasn't going to go out of this marriage office without anything. I found him at his office, and of course, the witch that had started this whole problem was there with him. And I told her explicitly what I thought of her. That she was a marriage wrecker who, instead of respecting her old age, was behaving like a prostitute and panting after a married man. Well, that didn't bode well for me because my husband threw me out of his office when I hadn't even delivered the message I had come to say to him. It didn't stop me, though. I came again the next day and the day after until I became a nuisance in his workplace, and he had no choice but to give me an audience. Then I told him everything I thought of him and his cheap two-timing behind, and my husband told me what he thought of me. Apparently the house had been real, but he had switched the papers and bought the house for himself since he had a 1/3 commanding interest in the house. And my savings? He had cleared that because he also owned the account. That day my husband swore he was going to wreck my life like I had wrecked his. It was on this day that I found out that my husband was fighting for ownership of his firm with his best friend in court. I had contributed to the problem. I signed the divorce papers on that day in shame, with the hope that at least he would forgive me, and I could start from scratch again. I knew there was no way I was going to get custody of my son. I didn't even want to try. Do you guys think I did the right thing? Update 2. Hi Redditors. I'm back with an update on what happened with my life after I divorced my husband. Apparently my husband wasn't done with me. Nope, I wasn't nowhere done paying for my sins with my husband and his best friend. After I had divorced my husband and receded all rights of custody of my son, I had tried to pick up my life, but of course that had been hard without a dime to my name. My parents had decided to cut me off ever since I had married my ex-husband, and even as I became free from the marriage, they still wanted nothing to do with me. Well, my friends were a close-knit bunch that agreed with what my parents said, so I didn't have any help from them. I had to go back to being a barista. I began living from hand to mouth. I had nowhere to stay. You'll think with all these terrible things happening to me, I would have learnt my lesson. No, I hadn't. 6 months after I had divorced my husband, and 6 months of working like an elephant and eating like an ant, someone walked into the cafe where I was working. Your first guess would surely be my ex-husband's best friend. But no, that wasn't who graced my cafe with their presence. It was my ex-husband's ex-wife. According to her, she had been watching me for some time and was saddened by how things were going horrible for me. Yeah, the witch just came to laugh in my face. She said she had a job for me and asked if I had any qualms with working with my ex-husband again. I was about to say no. There was no way I was going to be working with my ex-husband again. Then I heard the salary amount for the job, and I was humbled. That was 5 times my monthly income as a barista in just 1 month. I didn't waste any time in accepting not knowing I was setting myself up for another run. Well, I found out the hard way. I began working for my ex-husband's ex-wife as her personal assistant. Who would have thought I would be this deeply involved in drama after the one I just got out from? I'm sure you guys didn't see this coming. It was like I was living a dream. Scratch that, I was living in a nightmare. Like, has anyone ever experienced this level of drama in their lives, or am I the only one that's always singled out for bad things? There was no way the life I was living was normal or real or true in any way. No matter how hard I wished it was a dream, this was my reality. During the beginning weeks, things hadn't been weird at all. I didn't even get to see my ex-husband, but things began to get weird and suspicious, and I was in the middle of it once more. My ex-husband's ex-wife, my boss more of, had an imitator in her office most of the time whenever I went there to submit a document she asked for. The lawyers supposed to defend the law and have a clean slate free of crime were the ones doing the most evil things. I didn't know what she'd been using the imitator for. In fact, how I had found out she had been using an imitator was when she told me to go and drop off the document I had gotten from my ex-husband's personal secretary. I had viewed the document and found that something was off about it. No one would notice except someone with a keen eye, and I had lived with my ex-husband for 7 years, so I knew exactly how he signed his signatures. I knew something was off. Yep, something was really off, and it started to unveil itself when I found my ex-husband's best friend in a meeting with my boss, his ex-wife. That's when I knew that something was going on, and it was going to be against my husband. But I couldn't do anything about it. I was an employee of his ex-wife, and he had cut me out of his life. My only hope was that my child was safe and not involved in whatever they had planned. They began to let me in on their plans, scratch that. They began to slip with their plans in front of me when my boss ordered me to make copies of a CAFO of a house. You all would never guess what just landed in my lap. My boss had just told me to go make copies of the rights to the ownership of my house. The house my husband had allegedly bought for me, but bought back for himself in his attempt to ruin me. Like, can you imagine my stroke of luck? What was she doing with it? It was none of my business, so I just did my job and made copies of the papers like she had told me to. But the feeling of holding what had rightfully been the papers to my property in my hand, after I had let it slip from my fingers, that had stung. I was sure that was what my boss had wanted to accomplish. She wanted me to know how it felt, not having something to call my own. After that incident, it seemed their plans started working for them because my ex-husband came back from his trip and began searching his whole office for important documents. I had heard that he had thrown a tantrum when he couldn't find whatever he was looking for. Apparently, he hadn't known I was now working for his ex-wife, and I didn't run into him. You want to know when things became truly suspicious and horrible for me? I mean, it was like I couldn't have a single moment of peace ever since I had cheated. Well, my husband's ex-wife came to me and gave me a large amount of cash and told me I could take 2 weeks off. In her own words, I deserved it. This was someone I just started working for a month ago. I should have known I was being set up. I had no clue until it all unfolded before my eyes. I took her money and went to rent a room and just rest from all the hassle I had been through. Yeah, then the police and my ex-husband came knocking. I had no idea how they had found out where I lived, but they barged in and started rapping in Spanish to my ears. There was talk of forgery and theft, and it was at the point they pulled the house papers with my signature on it that I knew I had been set up. Everything I said from that moment fell on deaf ears as I was whisked to the police station. I couldn't believe what was happening. This charge was going to be a dent to my name officially. When someone pulled up my records, they were going to see a criminal record. This charge was going to make it hard for me to get my son. Those had been the only thoughts in my head when the police read my rights and told me I had access to a state lawyer to defend my cause since I didn't have one. I couldn't afford one because I had been given counterfeit cash. This was another charge on my head because I wasn't supposed to be in possession of counterfeit bills. I tried. I tried so very hard to explain that I had been a pawn that had been set up. However, my ex-husband's ear was closed to my pleas. According to him, I had come back to try to take everything once again, and I could never be trusted. This was how I was whisked away to prison. Yep, folks, I was found guilty for forgery and theft and was sentenced to prison for 10 years. I wasn't going to see my son for 10 years. My life was completely and utterly ruined. And it was still ruined, but luckily I didn't get to go to prison for 10 years. How would I be here typing this update a year later, if I had gone to prison. Well, my case was reviewed 2 months later when everything was uncovered that it had been my ex-husband's ex-wife and his best friend's plan to use me as a cover front for their much bigger fraud. They didn't get away with it, though. Yeah, that's how I was released. Apparently, they had made me sign the paper without my knowledge. Yes, my signature hadn't been forged. That's why the court had found me guilty in the first place. However, they just wanted my ex-husband to be focused on my case while they sold the firm to the rival firm and disappeared with the money. They also forged my ex-husband's signature to gain access to his accounts. That's when they were found. And I was released after going through the worst 2 months of my life. I had contemplated dying because it was difficult on those nights when I thought about what I would do with my life after 10 years of rotting in prison. What I had gone there is something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy because I had seen what my eyes couldn't imagine. I'm sure you're wondering if my husband apologized to me after the whole fiasco was over. He didn't. In his own words, I had deserved everything that was happening to me. According to him, maybe sometime I would get to have some common sense to know not to trust easily. Yeah, I had learned my lesson big time. Trying to get a job with my criminal record was hard and sometimes warranted in insults from employers. I couldn't get to see my child too because my ex-husband was threatening heaven and hell if I ever came near them. So I was stuck once more, living from hand to mouth until I gained the courage to face my parents again. Lol, it didn't go well, but at least I got a roof over my head and occasional food while I figured out the next step of my life. My mom was the one pressuring me to do more than wait on people and serve them coffee. That I should do something useful with my degree, that's why they had put me through school. I get that she was trying to be helpful, and it was in her nature, but I was trying. I woke up trying and went to sleep trying. This was something that wouldn't leave my mind, even in my second lifetime. Yep, I was stuck with the memory of never getting to see my son. And nothing I could do would rewind the clock to stop me from making the horrible decision of having an affair with my husband's best friend. I hope you all have learned a thing or two from my experience in trusting people and hurting those you claim to love. I had caused my problem myself when I had cheated on my husband as an effort to curb my loneliness. It had been stupid, and I will continue facing the consequences of my actions by not getting to watch my child grow up. That's one thing I was going to miss, and it pains me to the depths of my soul. I hope one day my ex-husband gets to allow me back into my child's life. As for you folks, I hope you guys get to learn not to trust just anyone, even if it's your closest pal, because they can turn around to bring about your downfall, and family always has your back, no matter if they cut you off for eternity. They would have your back still. This doesn't mean you should ever succumb to having an affair outside your marriage. You would learn the hard way like I did. I'm still trying to pick up my life after I was left with nothing, and it's been hard every step of the way. But I'm thinking, I'll move to a new city and start life over again. Maybe see if with a new place there will be new opportunities. Well, I hope you have a good life, Redditors, and stay away from trouble. Bye.